everybody, this is Caitlin and you are watching Zombie Eats Books. The first book I'm going to talk about is Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. This was published in 2005 and I believe it was Butler's last novel before she died. It is an interesting little sci-fi novel about a young woman named Shori who is a vampire, and the interesting thing about Shori is that while most vampires are white, she is a black vampire. And she is black through genetic experimentation, and this is like voluntary. Her mother, an African American woman, donated her genes to these vampires so that they could give birth to Shori. So it makes Shori not only a stronger vampire, but it also makes her a stronger person in a variety of ways. So first and foremost, this book is meant to make you uncomfortable. Shori is a vampire. She's lived on this earth for 50 plus years. However, since she is a vampire and she doesn't have a body like a human, she appears to be an 11 or 12-year-old little girl. And she is also sexually active. So the sex scenes in this book between Shori and adult humans are extremely uncomfortable, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around them. The other thing that's interesting about the sexual relationships is that once a vampire bites a human, that human becomes emotionally obsessed with the vampire. Physically, they need them, and also they're sexually attracted to them. And then in return, the vampire is also emotionally attached to the human, and of course they need the human for their blood. But you know, it's this symbiotic relationship, but the vampire clearly has the upper hand, and it makes the sexual consent something that, you know, you need to think about, because if once a vampire bites a human, they become so obsessed with that vampire that they, you know, have sex with them, and they wouldn't have had sex with them before they were bitten, then certainly that's a question of consent. And then on top of that, there are also these family relationships in these vampire communities that resemble polygamous relationships. And I say resemble because they're not exactly polygamous relationships. They're actually more complicated than that. But you put the polygamy in there, you put the sexual consent in there, you put Shori's appearance as a 12-year-old girl in there, and this book definitely makes you uncomfortable. Of course, Shori, as a black vampire among white vampires, has to deal with a lot of racism in this book, because it turns out that even though vampires have lived for hundreds of years and you would think would be wiser for it, they're still racist as fuck. So there are a lot of great themes in here that just make you think, and it was just a very interesting book. It felt most like a first novel in a series. I was expecting to go back online and find that this was actually the first book in a series, but it's not. It's a standalone novel. I don't know if that was intentional or if she just died before she could write any more books, but at the end, I was left wanting more, and I would have definitely read more about Shori as a character. And the next book I read was Deathless by Catherine M. Valente. This was published in 2011, and it's based off of Russian folklore and early 20th century Russian history. It was a beautiful book. One of the things that I liked most about it was this comparison between the human world and the folklore world, the world hidden. And while I found myself wanting there to be a very distinct difference between the human world and the folklore world, because, you know, there was a lot of violence in that hidden world, the magical world, I'll call it from now on, I guess, and an excess of emotion to the point of apathy and all of these crazy things, and there are just no rules, right? And so I wanted the human world to be the counterbalance to that and be this place full of sense and reason and, you know, tempered emotion. And the more you read, the more those two worlds just blend, and I thought that was really brilliant. There was also this sense of inevitability, this endless cycle that these characters were forced to repeat, and that this particular story of this particular character, whose name is Maria, that she's lived it before, that other girls behind her have lived it before, but that she can't help but proceed the way that she proceeds. And it gave it this depth. It made you want to really examine the story and try to find what you could learn from it. This book was written beautifully. The prose is gorgeous. The imagery is gorgeous. I felt like a kid again reading a fairy tale with that same sense of awe and imagination, just, you know, along adult lines, because this certainly isn't a children's story. My only critique of this book is that I got a bit lost in the allegory at times. In fact, at the end, she gets so surreal that I'm not entirely sure what happened at the end, but it was definitely an enjoyable ride, and I think I probably would have done a little better in my understanding if I had a better idea of the folklore that this was based on, which I have none, and also the history that this book incorporates, because while I know generally what happened in early 20th century Russia, I'm by no means an expert. So I think if I were more knowledgeable in those two areas, it would have helped a little bit, but I still think I would have gotten a little bit lost as well. So yeah, that's my only critique. This is a gorgeous book. If you like Russian history and you like fairy tales, then I would definitely pick this up. So the last book I read was 1066, The Year of the Conquest by David Howarth. This is nonfiction and it was published in 1978. It's a book about William, the Duke of Normandy, and how he defeats the English at the Battle of Hastings. One thing that I really appreciated about this was that Howarth really differentiates between the Norman accounts of what happened and the English accounts of what happened, and he lets you know which historians might be biased in either direction. And then he gives you this interesting account of what may have happened between those two viewpoints. So I really liked that. I really liked the way that he brought both Harold and William to life. I felt like I was reading about real people, and I realized these are real people. This is nonfiction, but I don't always feel like that when I'm reading nonfiction. I feel like sometimes when historians talk about figures in history, they just seem really wooden and they don't come to life, and this author certainly wasn't like that at all. He also talks about the structure of England at the time and the culture of England, and then the structure and culture of Normandy, which helps you figure out how these events came to be. The writing style is just really accessible, and being a fiction reader and not much of a nonfiction reader, I really appreciated that. There are only a couple of really nitpicky things that I didn't like about this book. One was some really dated ideas about the relationship between psychology and homosexuality. You can tell that it's an idea from the 1970s, and I think that when they republished this, they should definitely take that out. It's only like one sentence, but when I read it, it shocked me a little bit. And then the other thing that I would have appreciated is if Howarth had included more information about female figures during this time. I realized that there wasn't a lot of information, and that would have been very difficult for him to do, to bring the female figures to life as he brought the male figures to life. But I don't know, I feel like there could have been at least a little bit of an effort to do that, and there wasn't. Anyway, if you're interested in this period in history and you want a good starter book, then I would definitely suggest this. It's very short, very accessible, very readable. And I almost forgot again, but last time when I posted a video reviewing the books that I had recently read, I left one of the books out. I had recorded, and it was the last book that I talked about, and my daughters came out and interrupted me, and there was like a bunch of noise going on. So it was basically unusable, and I didn't want to film again, so I just told myself that I would add it to the next video. So that's what I'm doing now, and that book is A Quart of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, or Mass, I don't know how do you say that. But this was published this year. This is a fantasy/romance series. It's the second in a series. The first book was called A Quart of Thorns and Roses. I really, really enjoyed A Quart of Thorns and Roses, but I loved this book. If you don't like romance, then I definitely wouldn't suggest this book. I know there'll probably be people that would consider this to be fantasy first and then romance second, but I would definitely consider it to be romance first and then fantasy, or at least equally those things, because I mean, this has all the tropes in it. It has all the expectations that one would have when reading a romance novel, and it delivers on all of those things. I can't talk much about it because it is the second in a series, but everything that I wanted to happen happened, and it made me feel all warm and cozy inside, and that's what I want out of my romance novels. Also, I did really enjoy the female character in here. She was strong, not just mentally, but also physically, and yeah, that's really all I can say about it. Everything else would be spoiling. Ooh, look at the way the cover flashes. Anyways, if you like romance, I would definitely suggest this series. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you liked about them, what you didn't like about them, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.